So yeah, I've taught this. This year was my second year teaching this specific lesson. I got the idea from the Utah Council of Teachers of Mathematics conference a couple of years ago, and they were talking about use numberless problems and all that stuff. And last year was the first year I did it, and it went really well. And I went last year just kind of how the lesson plan is laid out because it was my first time doing it. And it went well. I really felt like the students understood it. This year, the students brought out something that I had not thought of before. And so I ended up adding an extra part. So I wrote this lesson plan
Prior.
out because I was about to teach it again. I was like, oh, this will be a great lesson to write out because I'm about to teach this again. So I wrote it out how it had gone last year. And then this year, my students, when they were exploring the surface area, before we got to the part where I wrote or I had them write any strategies on the board, I realized this year that there was another one. So most people, I always knew they'd come up with volume, they'd come up with surface area, and then another group came up instead with finding the perimeter of all the shapes, which is not a correct strategy the way that they were doing that. But it made me realize that there were these three solid ideas that were all founded in things we had already done. We've been talking about perimeter earlier. We've been talking about area. We've been talking about volume. And so I started by having like the class discussion. I started with having those strategies on the board. And I had I had the teams talk about each strategy and talk about, well, how did they get this strategy? What are they actually finding? What is this strategy actually finding? Like, where would the wrapping paper be going if this is the strategy we used, right? Perimeter. In the case of what they were doing is finding like all the edges, the lengths of all the edges, right? Or volume, stuffing the whole thing full of wrapping paper. Or there were people finding the areas of all the shapes. So we did that one first. And through the discussion, they were able to say like, oh, okay, so I recognize now that that perimeter idea is not going to cover everything I needed to. And after they had had the discussion of all these different ideas, then I went and I had other people, I strategically went through the room looking at the different strategies, and I had different people write their strategy on the board showing all their work.